All right, let's continue reading Margaret Fuller's Women of the 19th Century. Recall that we're going to annotate on a paragraph by paragraph basis. We're going to put Fuller's key ideas into our own words, paraphrase. Now, that might seem time consuming, but this is a really good strategy for comprehending difficult texts. It's also going to help us better infer Fuller's perspective, right? By following Fuller's argument, we should be able to determine how Fuller experiences and beliefs shaped how she views sort of the status of women. Remember, this is one of the first feminist writings that we get in American literature. Now, of course, feel free to skip over sections of the video if you don't need help annotating or understanding a particular part. But on the other hand, I'm going to go through the reading pretty quickly since I don't want the video to be too long. So please be sure to pause to copy down information as you need to. All right. Of Miranda, I had always thought as an example that the restraints upon the sex were insuperable only to those who think them so, or who noisily strive to break them. She had taken a course of her own, and no man stood in her way. Many of her acts had been unusual, but excited no uproar. Few helped, but none checked her, and the many men who knew her mind and her life showed to her confidence as to a brother, gentleness as to a sister. And not only refined, but very coarse men approved and aided one in whom they saw resolution and clearness of design. Her mind was often the leading one, always effective. What's going on here? Well, let's take a look at some of the more challenging words. We start here with this idea that the restraints being insuperable. What on earth does insuperable mean? Well, it means impossible to overcome. So if we pair that with this idea of being insuperable only to those who think them so, or who noisily strive to break them, we have the idea that only those people, right, and we're talking women, who think it's hopeless, and those who try too hard, those are the ones who are unable to overcome the restrictions placed on women. Now, she does her own thing, right? By contrast, nobody really stops her. But she does still have a good relationship with men, generally. She's not one of these vocal, angry feminists, right? She's not one of these man-haters, but she has a genuine connection to other men. When I talked with her upon these matters, and had said very much what I have written, she smilingly replied, "And yet we must admit that I have been fortunate, and this should not be. My good father's early trust gave the first bias, and the rest followed, of course. It is true that I have had less outward aid in after years than most women, but that is of little consequence. Religion was early awakened in my soul, a sense that what the soul is capable to ask, it must attain, and that, though I might be aided and instructed by others, I must depend on myself as the only constant friend. This self-dependence, which was honored in me, is deprecated as a fault in most women. They are taught to learn their rule from without, not to unfold it from within. This is the fault of man, who is still vain, and wishes to be more important to woman than, by right, he should be." So in this passage, we're getting information about how Miranda's upbringing sort of shapes the way she sees the world. She starts by admitting that she has in fact been lucky. It's her father's early upbringing. The way she's been brought up from the beginning has sort of shaped the rest of her experiences. She does take a moment to admit that if she was as dependent as other women, her life might have been a little bit easier, but ultimately, that's okay. She recognizes that it's a sort of fundamental important thing to know for yourself what you need, right? You need to be able to know what the soul is capable, to ask it and to attain it. So you ought to be able to know for yourself what you need out of life. You should be able to ask for it, and you should expect to get it in life. Okay, so this is a sort of a key for self-advocacy. And this self-reliance is so important because ultimately you really can only count on yourself. But the self-dependence does separate her from others, right? She was encouraged to be independent, but remember that that's usually seen as a bad thing for women. What they learn instead is they're taught to learn from sort of the external world, right? They learn how to live life based on restrictions rather than from their own process of self-discovery or self-determination. Remember that the transcendentalists, right, Fuller among them, they believed in the innate self as a source of knowledge. So the key here is that women should be able to have knowledge and experience come from within, not from rules imposed upon them from the outside. This is the fault of man, right? So here she goes on to explain that the reason independence is seen as a bad thing is because it's the men. The men are trying to keep them down. Now, here we have a bit of a chink in Fuller's argument, right? She says this is the fault of men. Men are keeping us down. But is it all men? Do all men believe that women should be denied equal opportunity? We have a really good example of a man who does not. For example, Miranda's own father. So this is considered a hasty generalization. We're doing a little bit of stereotyping here. Men have not shown this disposition toward you, I said. No, because the position I early was enabled to take was one of self-reliance. And were all women as sure of their wants as I was, the result would be the same. But they are so overloaded with precepts by guardians who think that nothing is so much to be dreaded for a woman as originality of thought or character, that their minds are impeded by doubts till they lose their chance of fair, free proportions. The difficulty is to get them to the point from which they shall naturally develop self-respect and learn self-help. So here what's going on is Miranda kind of contrasts her upbringing with those of most 19th century women. She says that men don't appear to be trying to keep Miranda down, right? Men have not shown this disposition toward you. And Miranda explains, well, yeah, that's because she was able to be reliant from an early age, but that's not the case for other women. Other women are overloaded with these precepts, right? A precept is sort of a rule or a guideline. So other women are overloaded with these precepts. That is, the men in their lives sort of tell the women what to do. And in particular, they tell the women to avoid original thoughts and actions, right? This is a problem. And the men tell the women this so often that the women begin to doubt themselves, right? Their minds are impeded by doubts. They begin to doubt themselves so much that they can't even think for themselves. They lose their chance of fair, free proportions, okay? So take a moment here. Consider Fuller's perspective, right? What type of upbringing do you think she's advocating here? What kind of upbringing is she advocating against? Okay, so again, here we have this idea of the way most women are raised. It's just so strong that they doubt themselves. They can't think properly. Once I thought that men would help to forward this state of things more than I do now. I saw so many of them wretched in the connections they had formed, in weakness and vanity. They seemed so glad to esteem whenever they could. The soft arms of affection, so one of the most discerning spirits, will not suffice for me unless I see the steel bracelets of strength. But early I perceived that men never, in any extreme of despair, wish to be women. On the contrary, were ever ready to taunt one another at any sign of weakness with, "Art thou not like the woman who... ... Okay, so we can break it into essentially 3 sections. Once, I thought men would help to forward the state of things more than I do now. I saw so many of them wretched in the connections they had formed in weakness and vanity. They seemed so glad to esteem wherever they could. So originally, I thought men would want to change it. In fact, the soft arms of affection, so one of the most discerning spirits, will not suffice me unless on I see the steel bracelets of strength. So not only did I think men would be interested in change, but they themselves seemed to claim that they respected women who were strong, not just pleasant or affectionate to be around. But the truth of the matter is that early I perceived men never, in any extreme of despair, wished to be women. In fact, they used the idea of being a woman as an insult. They use it to compare men. Art thou not like the woman who... Now the passage ends various ways, according to the occasion and rhetoric of the speaker. When they admired any woman, they were inclined to speak of her as above her sex. Above her sex. Now silently I observed this, and feared it argued a rooted skepticism, which for ages had been fastening on the heart, and which only an age of miracles could eradicate. So it seems like this is a long-standing state of affairs, and it's unlikely Miranda thinks it'll ever change. Ever have I treated with great sincerity, and I look upon it as a signal instance of this, that an intimate friend of the other sex said in a fervent moment that I deserved in some star to be a man. So one time Miranda was talking to this guy, and he thought he was complimenting her when he said, you deserve to be a man. Ugh. He was much surprised when I disclosed my view of my position and hopes, when I declared my faith that the feminine side, the side of love, of beauty, of holiness, was now to have its full chance, and that, if either were better, it was better now to be a woman, for even the slightest achievement of good was furthering an especial work of our time. There's a lot going on there. All right? If we break apart these ideas, this guy that complimented her, he's surprised when Miranda explains that it's actually the best time to be a female these days. The feminine traits that she lists, they're critical, and they benefit all women. But he smiled incredulously. She makes the best she can of it, thought he. Let Jews believe the pride of Jewry, but I am of the better sort and no better. So this guy doesn't really get what she's saying. He doesn't really believe her. Finally, at the end here, we have an example of a famous poem that looks at womanly virtues. So in the noble passage of Ben Jonson, I mean the star today should not brighter ride, nor shed like influence from its lucent seat. I meant she should be courteous, facile, sweet, free from that solemn vice of greatness, pride. I meant each softest virtue there should meet, fit in that sober bosom to abide. Only a learned and a manly soul I purposed her, that should with even powers the rock, the spindle, and the shears control of destiny, and spin her own free hours. So, can using the word manly to describe a manly soul really be that bad? Read the final paragraph on your own. That's a description where Fuller and Miranda discuss how using language in a certain way can shape our bias. I'm not going to read it for you. By this point, you should be able to annotate on your own. But don't worry. If you're stuck, here are some things you can be looking to highlight, comment upon, or put into your own words. Now, for completion of this activity, make sure you submit both photos of your annotated pages and the completed Google Doc. As always, please email me if you have any questions. Thanks.